What's up, guys, and welcome to Wall Street Millennial. Yesterday, on February 18th, the House Financial Services Committee questioned the CEOs of Robinhood, Reddit, and Citadel, as well as Wall Street Bets legend Keith Gill regarding the Gamestop saga. Robinhood CEO Vlad was asked about why his firm banned the buying of GameStop stock, and he largely laid the blame on the Central Clearinghouse, the DTCC, who increased Robinhood's margin requirements in light of increased volatility. But he largely obfuscated and didn't go into detail about why the DTCC supposedly demanded billions of dollars of extra collateral overnight and essentially forced Robinhood and other brokers to ban buying. This ban almost certainly contributed to the stock's subsequent decline. Interactive Brokers also implemented similar trading restrictions at the height of the short squeeze, and their CEO, Thomas Peterffy, gave some insights into the real underlying reasons GameStop shares were halted.
How close we were to this system breaking, something failing. How close were we, Thomas?
We were frighteningly close on January 28th when we had 50 million registered shares. At the same time, we had 70 million shares short and 150 million shares short via short call options. So if the call options had been exercised, the shorts would have had to deliver 270 million shares, while only 50 million shares existed. So as the rules are today, the long broker has to, if he can't get the shares, he has to go into the market and buy the shares at whatever the price is. So that could have pushed the price further up into the thousands. When that happens, obviously the shorts cannot pay up. So the brokers, they default on the brokers default on the clearinghouse, and the whole thing is a huge mess that's impossible to untangle.
According to the CEO, at the height of the short squeeze on January 28th, there were about 50 million shares available on the free float. However, between shares that were outright shorted and call options that could theoretically be exercised, there was a potential for GameStop shareholders to call back more than 200 million GameStop shares. To meet these requirements, the hedge funds that shorted the shares and the market makers who sold the call options would be forced to do everything in their power to obtain GameStop shares. This process started unfolding and took GameStop shares up to nearly $500 on January 28th. According to the Interactive Brokers CEO, had the process been allowed to continue unimpeded, GameStop stock would have continued rising into the thousands. To understand how this impacts brokers like Robinhood, we have to understand how short selling works. When a Robinhood customer owns shares of heavily shorted stock like GameStop, Robinhood lends that share out to short sellers like Melvin, and the shares go through the Central Clearinghouse. Melvin has to pay interest on those shares that it borrowed. So Melvin and other short sellers indirectly pay Robinhood to allow them to short the shares owned by Robinhood customers. Of course, Robinhood keeps all of this money for themselves and gives no obvious disclosures that they engage in this practice. Normally, you wouldn't even notice that your shares are being lent out, but the problem arises if short sellers go bankrupt and cannot return the shares that it borrowed. This is almost what happened to Melvin.
So there is a simple solution for this, the way I see it. Number one, we would have to get the short positions published once a day, because we currently have it only twice a month. And second, the SEC would have to require brokers to charge an additional 1% of margin for every 1% of short interest. And that would then raise the margins progressively so high that people would stop shorting stocks.
So margin requirements would have to increase as short interest increases. That seems to be the view from you, Thomas. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, overseeing a broker, is there anything you can do to protect your clients before the SEC or the regulator has to tell you to do it?
Of course we can. That's exactly what we did. We increased our margins. So
why does the regulator need to make that decision on your behalf, Thomas? I'm just speaking out loud with you, thinking out loud, trying to work through this process with you. Why do you need the regulator to make that step?
Well, so first of all, I do not know the short interest daily, and that would be important for me to be able to know how much to increase the margins by. So the regulators could require that the short interest be reported daily. That's very simple. Secondly, the regulators tell us the minimum margin we must charge, and we are free to charge more, and that's exactly what we did. But some brokers may not know how to deal with this. That's why I think it would be good if the SEC required all brokers to charge more on shorts.
Currently, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, or FINRA, only requires hedge funds to report how much of a stock they are short twice a month. Between reporting dates, the short interest of a stock can change drastically. During the interim, brokers and other market participants don't know the short interest of a given stock, and this makes it hard for them to decide how much margin to sell short interest. If short interest was reported daily, brokers can increase the margin they charge to short sellers as the short interest goes up in real time. At the height of the short squeeze, margin rates for Gamestop were only 30%, even though the short interest well exceeded 100%. If brokers charged a margin rate equal to the short interest, margin rates for borrowing Gamestop would be over 100%, which would discourage hedge funds from shorting so much of the stock in the first place, and the whole Gamestop situation would have been avoided. The Interactive Brokers CEO's suggestion of increasing margin rates with short interest is an interesting policy idea that would mitigate the disruptive force of short-selling hedge funds. But what we really want to know about is a specific decision to halt shares of Gamestop.
Thomas, what would you like to see asked today? And who would you like to see those questions aimed at?
I basically would like to ask the SEC why they didn't act on the morning of January 28th, because I was so scared. I can't tell you how scared I was.
Well, Thomas, what were you scared about? What does failure look like? You said we came close to breaking. What were you scared of? What did you think was going to happen?
I was scared of a domino bankruptcy. I mean, I tell you, the rules require the long brokers to go into the market and buy the shares at whatever price. So that drove the shares up to $480, and then suddenly, I guess, it didn't go further, but it could have gone further. So if the shorts had known, if the longs had known that they have the right to ask for their shares,
yeah,
and they really wanted a short squeeze, that's what they would have done.
He says he was scared about the domino bankruptcy if the short squeeze was left unchecked. If short sellers like Melvin went bankrupt, they would not be able to return the shares that they borrowed. Melvin lost more than 50% of its portfolio value as they covered their position near the top. Let's assume they covered at an average price of $300. If Robinhood had not halted trading, shares could easily have gone up to $600, in which case Melvin's portfolio would have been completely wiped out. They would have gone bankrupt and wouldn't have the money to pay back the shares they borrowed. If this happens, brokerages like Robinhood and Interactive Brokers are left holding the bag because they still have to return the shares to their end customer, who actually owned the share in the first place. And since the short seller is now bankrupt and can't deliver the shares, Robinhood has to buy the shares on the open market. If Robinhood doesn't have enough money to buy those shares, the DTCC, the central clearinghouse, is left holding the bag. The DTCC wants to avoid incurring any losses, so they require Robinhood to post collateral that will cover those losses in the event that a short seller is unable to deliver the shares. In light of the Gamestop short squeeze, the DTCC recognized that the chances of short sellers going bankrupt increased massively, and accordingly increased Robinhood's margin requirement. Robinhood didn't have the money to post this collateral, so they made a deal with the DTCC, where they would mitigate the risk of short seller bankruptcy by halting the buying of GameStop stock. This decision successfully caused GameStop shares to tank, giving short sellers the opportunity to cover their positions at a lower price and avoid bankruptcy. At the end of the day, this entire mess is the product of Robinhood lending their customers' shares out to short sellers and not having sufficient capital to manage their risk. In normal times, this is an incredibly lucrative practice for Robinhood, as they are able to collect millions of dollars of interest payments from short sellers. Since Robinhood is acting as the short seller's lender, their financial interests are aligned. Robinhood has a vested interest in making sure the short sellers don't go bankrupt because if they do, Robinhood and the clearinghouse will be left holding the bag. This caused a conflict of interest and ultimately led Robinhood to halt shares, which tanked the stock and protected the hedge funds at the expense of Robinhood customers. In his testimony, Robinhood CEO Vlad blames the T+2 clearing processes and how the DTCC forced them to increase their collateral. He conveniently failed to mention anything about Robinhood's practice of lending out shares to short sellers and the real reasons the collateral requirement was increased. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. If you like this content, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. What did you guys think about Robinhood's decision to ban trading and their practice of lending out customers shares? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.